Greetings, everyone. It's 2 o'clock, so we'll get started with today's webinar. I'm Bob Gorel, Executive Director of the Maryland Interagency Commission on School Construction, and I will be joined in presenting by IAC staff members Alex Donahue and Arabia Davis. It is our privilege to present foundational information to the public and to Maryland stakeholders that we believe will strengthen the understanding of the many concepts that will be discussed at length in the upcoming meetings of the work group on assessment and funding of K-12 facilities. This webinar is the second of 4 and describes how and why managing the total cost of ownership of a facility and of a portfolio of facilities is essential to fiscal sustainability. Questions we encourage, and you may submit them throughout the presentation. If you click on the blue question and answer icon, you will see a white box to the right of your screen with Q&A at the top. Please enter your questions there, and we will attempt to answer them with the presentation material, or we will collect them and consolidate them into similar questions and answer them at the end of the presentation. We will take questions at the end up until we've addressed them all, or up until 3 p.m., at which time we will hard stop. Next slide. As we stated in the first webinar, managing a portfolio of facilities, school facilities are not set and forget assets. There are 4 primary phases of a facility's cycle of life, and the National Council on School Facilities has developed definitions that can allow cost accounting to best understand the total cost of ownership. That's what this presentation will cover. We know a lot about the phases associated with funding the most visible to the public, and they are design and construction phases. However, these 2 phases occur only for a short period of time in a facility's cycle of life, usually 3 to 5 years, while operation and maintenance are ongoing for 30 or more years. Together with the initial cost of building the facility, operation and maintenance make up the bulk of the total cost of ownership, with maintenance and capital maintenance, which are different, specifically being a large portion of the post-occupancy costs. Operations cover the heating, cooling, cleaning, and custodial work needed to ensure healthy and welcoming environments. And maintenance, which we will cover in detail in the next webinar, covers the routine and capital work and expenditures that allow education to be delivered. The National Council on School Facilities definition of maintenance is the work required to ensure that the school facility is kept in such a condition that it may be fully functional and continuously utilized for its expected lifespan, for its intended purpose, and at its maximum energy efficiency. Together, the cost of maintenance and the cost of operations over 30 years is just about the same cost again as the initial design and cost of construction. Planning is also ongoing, and this work, as well as maintenance, must increase or should increase as the facility approaches its end of life, or the point in its life when both functionally and economically the facility should be replaced or renewed. To be effective, planning depends on good comparable data. We covered this need in the first webinar, and the data should lead to extended discussions with stakeholders in operation and maintenance to continually improve the cost effectiveness of ownership and the delivery of educational programs of the entire LEA facilities portfolio. The funding expended for planning, design, construction, and operations and maintenance together represent the total cost of ownership for each school facility. Arabia?
Thank you. Good afternoon. To fully understand the total cost of a facility, we need to examine the approximate cost associated with each phase. which are represented in this slide. It's important to look at each phase's relative cost compared to the total cost of ownership. For our purposes here, we will leave the acquisition of a facility's site, meaning the land, out of the calculation because it can vary so widely from zero in the case of a site already owned by the LEA to a meaningful percentage in the case of a new school being built on a newly purchased land in a high-cost area. Planning, which can include demographic studies, community involvement, charrettes, and coordination with other public agencies, generally only amounts to a fraction of a percent. Design, however, can include architectural and engineering services, interior design, and landscape design, may add up to another 3%. Construction, which can include site development, permitting, furniture, fixtures, and equipment, is clearly a large component of total cost. However, the largest component by far is operation and maintenance. Over the 30 years during which a facility should serve its intended purposes before needing a major renovation. Operations and maintenance, which includes all the activities summarized in Webinar 1 and will be described in depth in Webinar 3, can make up more than half of the total cost of ownership over those 30 years. Next slide. As you are aware, no facility is an island. To deliver educational services and programs and support its students, each Maryland school district must maintain a set of school facilities matched to its local needs. Those needs are ever-changing as the population in the district's neighborhoods change. As discussed in the first webinar, having a portfolio of schools gives each school district the opportunity for some economies of scale to manage the ebbs and flows of not only enrollments, but also changes in educational programs. Managing school facilities as a portfolio versus reacting to each facility as being separate provides opportunities to free up dollars for program uses. One way in which an LEA can reduce total cost of ownership is to maximize the utilization of facilities through adjusting student school assignments. Take, for example, a district with 3 old school facilities and an uneven distribution of students. It might cost less over 30 years to build a brand new but larger school on a central site and eliminate 2 outlying and underutilized facilities than it would cost to renovate and continue to operate 3 smaller schools. In terms of design, decisions about what materials to use and which building systems to install can significantly affect the long-term cost of ownership. Every building has the potential to add to or subtract from the total cost of ownership through attributes such as size, fit, appropriateness to its application, its build quality, its maintenance and potential repair cost, and its energy efficiency. For example, a standing seam metal roof can cost twice as much as a 4-ply roof, but can last 3 to 4 times as long, thereby reducing the total cost of ownership over the course of a 50-year facility lifespan. Alex?
Thank you, Rabia. If you attended the first webinar, you saw this and the next slide, but we cannot overemphasize the importance of early decisions in achieving fiscal sustainability. Decisions made during the planning and design phases at the beginning of a facility's life cycle, such as its location, shape, size, and functional relationships, can have significant consequences and constrain future generations. When considering a facility's educational specifications, perhaps the most consequential decision is the total square footage of the facility. At current average construction costs, each gross square foot of additional space above baseline requirements translates into nearly $400 of additional cost of ownership after the first cost of construction over 30 years, because the LEA must spend money to operate and maintain that space. For example, at recent average construction prices, building an extra 20,000 gross square feet above the baseline will cost about $8 million. But that's not all. In addition to the $8 million construction cost premium, the 30-year cost of maintaining and operating the extra 20,000 gross square feet is another almost $8 million. On an annual basis, for 30 years, the combined $15.8 million equates to more than $500,000 per year that could have gone into educational programs or other services. Regardless of which taxpayer pocket, state or local, the $15.8 million comes from, upsizing of this nature across a portfolio can, in the aggregate, have a huge effect on the fiscal sustainability of that portfolio. The effect on the LEA will be to crowd out other needed projects in both the short and long terms. The effect on the state will be to reduce the number of local projects in which the state can participate, and not just for 1 year, but for many years. Over the course of the last 13 CIP cycles, the total local requests to the state for funding, shown here in blue, were on average more than double the state's allocations, shown here in green. So we know that there are unmet needs out there that are consistently not being addressed. And we know that the LEA's requests do not represent their total need. In October 2018, the IAC surveyed the LEAs to roughly understand their perception of backlog needs, and the total was a staggering $26 billion. Of course, it's neither feasible nor desirable to bring every single school to a like-new condition and keep it there from year to year. The strategy of portfolio management requires that we manage each dollar for each project today to bring down its total cost of ownership, so that collectively, the cost of ownership of our portfolio goes from increasing at approximately 1.6% per year, which has been our average gross square footage increase over 45 years, to decreasing at this rate or more. With this strategy, we will eventually achieve equilibrium with available funds and the expected conditions and functions of our school facilities portfolio. The fiscal sustainability of Maryland's portfolio depends upon the fiscal sustainability of each LEA's portfolio. And the fiscal sustainability of each LEA's portfolio is directly affected by the fiscal sustainability of each facility that the LEA owns. For this reason, the IAC is working to support all LEAs in their efforts to estimate and manage the total cost of ownership of every facility, both existing and planned. Towards this end, the IAC is developing a stable of tools to support optimizing the total cost of ownership of facilities. This stable includes, first, the sufficiency standards, which help LEAs identify high-priority deficiencies in existing facilities so that they can obtain the most bang for their improvement dollars. Second, the gross area baselines, which help LEAs design new facilities that can both meet their needs and support a fiscally sustainable portfolio. Third, the total cost of ownership comparison tool, which helps LEAs compare the estimated total cost of ownership of various design options long before they select a specific solution and lock their future generations of taxpayers into the long-term costs that will come with a given design. In light of the competing needs within each portfolio, doing this sort of estimating up front is essential for fiscal sustainability. Fourth, the IAC is working on building a tool that will help project the costs of each major building system in a facility over the upcoming years based upon both its actual condition and its predicted and actual life cycle costs.
As was noted in the first webinar, when aggregated to the entire state portfolio level, just the operations and maintenance ongoing costs of ownership are staggering. The level of spending effort to maintain and sustain our existing conditions of our existing portfolio based upon industry standards should be about $2.25 billion a year. As we have seen, the average age of the square footage of our school facilities continues to rise. As the IC Funding Programs Manager, I have seen, and the longitudinal record shows, that the demand for systemic spending continues to rise each year. Within the school systems, we hear that custodial and maintenance staffs have shrunk, yet the total square footage has doubled since the early 1970s. The continued operation of our schools attests to phenomenal efforts made by our school districts, maintenance, and operations staff. However, if our goal is to maintain steady conditions from decade to decade, it does not appear that we are doing that. Bob?
Thank you. Our objective must be to achieve a statewide portfolio of facilities that is educationally effective and fiscally sustainable over time. Achieving fiscal sustainability requires applying available resources to the needs as efficiently and effectively as possible. We must become focused on the long game, and we must get there also by focusing on the now. Two concepts are central to this work: a portfolio management approach and a full understanding of the total cost of ownership of each facility over time. This is why we have covered these two topics in our first two webinars. Ultimately, we all agree we need a healthy, safe, and educationally sufficient learning environment for every child in every seat in Maryland. Together, the state and the local jurisdictions are building the capacity to better provide this learning environment. Now we will take and try to answer any unanswered questions that we have not covered in our presentation today. We'll keep the webinar open for 2 to 3 minutes after the last question received, or up until 3 p.m. when we're scheduled to end. We have quite a bit of time and are ready to take your questions. If you have questions after we sign off today, please send them to the address on this slide. And if you have colleagues that were not able to attend today, please send them to our website. There we will publish the recording of this webinar, all follow-up questions, and today's slide deck with our notes. Prior to ending today's webinar, we will put up a slide informing you of the next webinars that precede the August 28 Assessment and Funding Workgroup that is scheduled to begin at 9 a.m. in the Senate building. Thank you again for participating in today's webinar, and we're ready for your questions. We have no questions so far. So in order to be mindful of everybody's time, and I'm glad that we could be clear, and for a lot of our audience, I should say that this material has been shared at regional meetings and at planning meetings around the state over the last year, that there still may be some unanswered questions, and we are certainly ready to take them. And we want to inform as many people as possible prior to the assessment and funding work groups meetings. There will be a lot of players involved that have not been involved in regional meetings or our site meetings around the state. Thank you. What do we have? About 17 minutes after 2 currently. We have a question. The 2% of construction costs as a rule of thumb for operation and maintenance funding is based on industry standards. For example, IFMA. Does it apply to schools, and do you have a feel for how existing LEA funding matches this standard? First, I want to say that 2% is for operations 2% and maintenance 2%. The first 2% is operations and routine maintenance. The second 2% is for capital maintenance. That is what we call systemics. And as we look at the numbers, we believe that we're below the requirements, and certainly it's very visible that we're below that on the capital maintenance side, the replacement of building systems. We have many that are past their existing life, and that puts an additional burden on maintenance staff as well as custodial staff, in fact. The importance of looking at this as we are planning and wanting to build replacement facilities or new facilities most specifically is to look for opportunities of reducing that cost of ownership. If we have more than we can take care of today, how we can resolve that partially is by putting more money in. But at the same time, if we can reduce the need by reducing the cost of ownership, that can come by higher quality building at the front or by reducing gross square feet as another potential, and the latter being the one that works with almost any strategy to building. That's how that we can whittle down our cost of ownership. I'm looking over at the clock. It's 19 minutes after 2. We have another question. Do you have indication on whether LEED has beneficially affected total cost of ownership? We don't have that information. However, we are sure that any way that an LEA can reduce its energy use, it's reducing its total cost of ownership. And LEED does encourage building that reduces the use of energy. And for that matter, it's also important to say that so do the building code revisions that have occurred over the last 20 years. But we can always improve on that. As for example, there have been many discussions recently that we've had with LEAs throughout the state that to build better shells, in other words, higher performing building shells that require less sophisticated equipment to operate, can lower the cost of maintenance and at the same time lower the cost of ownership with lower energy usage. Thank you for the question. I'm going to elaborate on that last question in that there is no fixed way to look at total cost of ownership. We will develop standard life cycle analysis so that systems can be compared on a case-by-case basis, but with comparable information for different building system types. We also will be looking to set the inflation rates of energy, which is very important to have on a comparison basis, for a year-by-year comparison basis. As it is currently, there are sometimes opportunities to look at total cost of ownership, but with different inflation rates of future cost of energy. And if we do this honestly, we'll need to have the standard inflation rates to be able to use in all calculations as we're determining one building type over another building type or building system over another building system. Anybody want to add anything to those comments?
I would like to add that we go into additional depth on the estimation of costs for operations and maintenance over 30 years for the component of total cost of ownership in our third webinar. So the first question about estimating costs based on construction cost will be answered again in greater depth in that third webinar, and so we invite you to participate in that next week.
Makes sense. So let's see, we've got about 18 minutes after 2 now, so we'll leave the mic open for another couple of minutes, see if we get another question. No, I think we've got another minute to go. This is the hard part, sitting and waiting for questions. So we'll be shutting down in 30 seconds, but watch to see if another question comes up. We're going to switch to the final slide that lets you know when the next webinars are up, and then also the first assessment and funding work group meeting on August the 28th. And we'll leave this up for a couple of minutes after we've closed the mic. Thank you all very much for attending today, and we look forward to presenting the next webinar on August the 12th, which is Monday at noon. Thank you.